Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization.
This is an actual fireside chat.
Indeed.
Have you had an actual fireside chat before for the
No,
podcast?
I have not. In fact, this is our first fireside chat virtual enlightenment salon. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I am Gennady Stolyarov II, chairman of the United States Transhumanist Party here in Kingsbury near Lake Tahoe. And joining me are Mark Hamalainen of the Longevity Biotech Fellowship and Anastasia Egorova of Open Longevity. Welcome. And you have both been guests on our virtual enlightenment salons before, but this is an in-person salon, so it's a first for the three of us. But could you tell our esteemed audience why we are here in Kingsbury? What brings you to this part of the Sierra Nevada mountains?
Oh, well, I guess that's my fault, probably. I've worked in San Francisco Bay Area for since about 2008 most of the time, and I would usually visit Tahoe and live in the Bay, but right now most of my work only requires me to be at a computer, so I decided to flip the equation and live at Tahoe and visit the Bay, which makes for a much more pleasant sort of natural environment to spend your time in. Yeah.
More pleasant and less expensive, I would imagine.
Both, yeah.
This is a longevity lodge, actually.
Yeah.
We have a bunch of people here, and everyone's very much interested in longevity. To a different extent, we are involved in the field. We both work in the longevity field. Our other people here who live with us for like a week or 2 weeks or a month, they're just interested in it, and hopefully they will end up in the field as well. That's what Mark is doing to people. That's what Open Longevity has been doing to other people too.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. And I am actually within driving distance of the Longevity Lodge, so we're starting to perhaps accumulate a bit of a hub for the longevity field in northern Nevada, I would suppose eastern California, but people are coming from the Bay Area, they're coming from all over the world to experience the environment here. So what have been some of your recent endeavors since we last spoke? And Mark, we last spoke in June of 2022 when you were our guest for a virtual enlightenment salon on the Longevity Summer Camp. This was a month before the first Less Death Longevity Summer Camp took place. So could you discuss your impressions of that and how your efforts have evolved since that time?
Yeah, almost 2 years now, and I guess when I came up with the idea, I was trying to recreate an experience that I had at a younger age, where I made a bunch of friends who we went on to like start ventures, projects, companies together, and I had the idea that I could recreate that for other people, but to do it not as a conference, because when I went to the conference, like, we didn't actually go to the talks. We just met and talked to each other, and then that was the important part of being there, was like connecting with other people with the same value system that you had. And so when we talked, I hadn't actually run it yet. It was just an idea, and we ran it, and we got, I would say, incredible feedback. People were actually hired to jobs at longevity companies at the camp. People quit their jobs and changed what they did. They started collaborations. It pretty much, I would say, went as well as it could have, which was maybe shouldn't have been surprising to me, but you try lots of things in life and not everything works out. And so it was successful. And then Nathan Chang, who was running this thing called the On-Deck Longevity Biotech Fellowship, that was a different program that was online only, whereas mine was in person. And he came to the camp, and we just got along really, really well. Just like completed each other's sentences. And On Deck decided to discontinue that program that he was running. It was it's sort of a startup incubator, and we decided to just merge the two programs and use the Less Death nonprofit entity to merge those two programs and continue, and that's what became the Longevity Biotech Fellowship. And we've run three more cohorts since then. So the original summer camp I call LBF 0, and now we're going to be doing LBF 4 in next month in Spain, actually.
Where were LBFs 1, 2, and 3?
So one was in California, in Marin, so just north of San Francisco. And then 2 was back at the same summer camp location. And then, so that had been 3 in a row in California. And there's a big audience in California, but of course, like the interest in extending lifespan is not a purely Californian thing. And so we did LBF 3 in Sweden, actually in collaboration with a local group called the Swedish Longevity Cluster. And Anastasia here was actually at LBF 1 and LBF 3. She's done both of the winter, but none of the summer ones.
Yeah, I'm a winter person, apparently.
So, what were your impressions of LBFs 1 and 3?
I mean, it's that's why I came to the third one, and I would love to be in the second one too. It is a great experience. I do agree with Mark that people that come to conferences, they don't really listen to talks. It's networking that matters, and that networking of the right type that matters, kind of. You meet people with you share value with, and it takes time. It takes time to submerge into the right type of ethics and ideas and understanding of the field. You cannot just listen to a half an hour talk and understand the complexity of biology of aging, or even like a day-long conference to understand it, because this guy going to be talking about their particular molecule, these people will be talking about their particular clinic, or these people will be talking about their biomarker of aging, and these are just pieces randomly presented to you. This is not a comprehensive picture of the field itself. You don't really understand what the longevity field is about. What the guys are trying to do in the camp is give a more overall vision, and also feature the right types of messaging. Sorry about that. Wording. They're good.
Yeah.
Messaging, but at the camp we don't really talk about diets.
That's actually specifically disallowed.
Yeah, it's a very easy topic to just end up having the conversations for hours. Everyone has their own experience and their own opinions, and you end up just days after days, months after months, years after years, we're discussing this diets in longevity field, which leads us nowhere. It's a very comfortable topic to pick up. So this is just off limit, and it's only important things that are discussed there. How do we actually stay alive, guys, if we're serious about these things? And I like it. I like the vibe too. It's very democratic is not the word. It is in Russian though.
Inclusive?
Inclusive, yeah. Relaxed. It's not your academic status that matters. It's your ideas that matters.
Nobody's there to try to prove anything or to try to fundraise for
that thing. Yeah. We just run around in our sportswear there, discussing important stuff. I don't know, going to sauna, doing the workouts together, eating healthy food together, and pretty intensely actually doing the workshops. Just important topics.
So it's interesting that you mentioned that you don't think anybody goes to the conferences for the talks. And for some context, when I was in school and in college, I was the kind of student who would sit at the front of the class and ask a lot of questions and try to internalize the lecture materials, and to a great extent I still do that during conference presentations, and I take pictures of the slides of the speakers so that I can have them as reference materials later on. I often try to get in a question or two after a particular speaker has presented, but when I was at the Longevity Summit Dublin, both in 2022 and 2023, and Mark, you were there in 2023, Aubrey de Grey pointed out that the major highlight of his conferences is actually what happens in the after hours. And there are many hours made available late into the night for people to essentially engage in the kind of networking that you described. And it is a different atmosphere. It's certainly less formal, more free-flowing, but you can gather insights that way that you might not be able to gather from a lecture, and you could even approach certain speakers and probe their knowledge further in greater depth than just the Q&A section of the presentation.
I think I can describe it because you haven't actually been to one of ours yet, which we should get you to one at some point actually, so that you could experience it. But like you mentioned, like Aubrey said that about Dublin, and I went to SENS 2, and I didn't go to any of the lectures at SENS 2. I just hung out with some other people my age who were there for the same reason I was, that they wanted to solve aging entirely, and we just ended up talking to each other. And the thing about lectures is you can watch them on YouTube. Like, most of the speakers have a recorded version of the talk that they're going to give on YouTube, or you can watch it later because they publish it for free later. So why would you spend a lot of money and travel to this place to listen to somebody talk when you could just watch that on YouTube? Wouldn't it be better to actually break up into smaller groups and actually have conversations with these people? And so what we actually do is we give people homework before they come to the camp. Like, they're expected to actually watch the talks of the people who are going to be the mentors there. So you don't have to sit and be passive when you get to the LVF camp. We actually break you up into smaller groups, and then we actually talk about what are outstanding problems in the field that even the mentors don't have a solution to. And we ask the attendees to brainstorm solutions, right? So we're actually engaging them. The whole thing is meant to be interactive, not passive. There is a little bit, like, we'll have a keynote speech each morning. There's maybe 20 minutes just to sort of set the stage for the day, the theme of the day. But then after that, it's all about interaction, not about passive information consumption.
Yes, that's quite an interesting model, and you have leveraged the ready availability of digital media. Of course, when I was a student, even finding a video recording on YouTube was wonderful. This was like 2008, 2009, the early days of YouTube. So if somebody posted any sort of video on YouTube, like me posting my atheism videos where I was essentially just sitting in my office at that time, it was seen as something sufficiently rare, something sufficiently outstanding that many people would gravitate toward it. But now you're correct, a lot of speakers will put up their talks online, and there are some similarities between those talks and the talks that they would give when presented.
Yeah,
especially if they're presented their published article. You just go read the article, you'll understand more. You'll have more time to go through all the charts there and visualizations and whatever.
Yeah, going to a conference to listen to a talk is sort of like using snail mail instead of email. I feel like it's actually an outdated way of interacting and advancing science.
So this is interesting because it speaks to how technology can shape our behavior and shape how we utilize our time, how we utilize certain occasions. But you're correct that the in-person networking is rather unique. And yes, you can do it over Zoom, but you can do it perhaps at a higher bandwidth at a conference.
Yeah, and actual projects have started as a result. Like, there's been multiple companies, and like there was a paper, the Bottlenecks to Progress longevity paper that was put out by a group of people at the LBF Zero Camp. Like, we did a study, and we actually published a paper. And there's also been companies that have started as a result of people that have met through our programs. But to you really have to have like a strong personal connection with somebody if you're going to actually commit to working with them for years, right? And so I think it's hard to do that over Zoom. I think doing that in person is still more powerful. Maybe at some point Apple Vision Pro or some version 5 of it will make it so that you don't have to be in person anymore, but I think there is still a magic to being in person that can't be replicated yet through like long distance virtual technology. So until that's been solved, I think that's something important. So that's what we do.
Yes, indeed. And actually, the original Enlightenment salons that I hosted were hosted in my house before the pandemic, of course, and they were smaller in-person gatherings, 4 to 6 people, where we would have a recorded segment, and it looks like I'm starting to come back to that gradually as the pandemic subsides a bit. I hope the COVID prevalence is going to be lower going forward. Of course, we don't know. But have you found that to be an issue at all in the LBF events? Have you had to take precautions?
I think at the first one we did, tell people to take a COVID test before they came, but it's not something that I've been particularly concerned about. I think it reminds me of like a topic, a discussion I had with a local here who was telling me I shouldn't go do some ski run because of avalanche danger, and I was explaining to them that, well, I actually know the terrain and it's less than 30-degree slope, and I understand the wind loading in that particular area, and I'm pretty sure it's safe, but I also know that I have a 100% chance of death from aging if we don't do something about it. And so I think COVID is something that by the time we were running the camps it's just not, compared to aging, I don't think it's a really very important concern. It
wasn't an immediate danger.
Yeah, nobody was in danger. Like nobody that came was, if you had some kind of comorbidity, then you should, be careful about what you do, but people should be able to make their own choices and understand their risks. And we're pretty low unless you have some kind of a strong comorbidity. So yeah, it's not something that we worried about too much.
It's just also timing. We've been running longevity schools in the middle of COVID. We had to stop the project, the program then. But it was just the beginning of it. And when LBF started, it wasn't that big.
Yeah, it had already been going on for, a year or more. Yeah.
So, Anastasia, I know Open Longevity has run in-person longevity schools as well. Mm-hmm. How did you first become acquainted with the Longevity Biotech Fellowship, and what led you to decide to join forces?
I think we met at Bay Area Education meeting, or that, or some Foresight event. Yeah, I don't know, just Mark told me about the last health camp.
I invited you.
Yeah, I realized I couldn't come because I thought that I'm gonna have to stay in the tent. And I didn't have a car, it was logistically just impossible for me to go, oh god, no.
It was an actual camp, most of the people.
Yeah, so that probably was the right estimation, but I missed that one. I look at much of the pictures afterwards on social media, how did I miss that? I have to be there. So the next one was a more inconvenient travel distance to the beach, just very close to the Bay Area. We have a lot since then. Someone couldn't speak on their time of the schedule. I had to jump in immediately.
Fill in.
Yeah, fill in.
And end up having one of the most popular.
Yeah, I think I just liked my talk, and then I'm giving the talks on transhumanistic art and community building and whatnot, as though we also have some scientific projects, but I think this is the right focus for longevity, and this is what I've been talking about.
Yes, so we last had a salon in September 2023, a bit more recently, but have there been noteworthy developments with Open Longevity since that time that you would like to share with our audience?
Funding issues kind of interfered with some of our projects, I can tell. But I think we kind of onto something now. We started this longevity news. The 2 projects in Russian. It's Новости бессмертия, which is immortality news, and in English it's going to be Save Forever News. Because Save Forever has been a movement. Brand. Yeah, it's a good brand. It's kind of still alive, though we haven't been maybe treating it with as much attention as kind of worth it. So, Save Forever News. We're gonna be covering everything that's happening in the world. Biotech, like science news, maybe cultural, not directly longevity related things. But everything has to be covered from the perspective of how is this beneficial to life extension? Is it or is it not? I just want to create this narrative around our field. Because, people are tweeting about this or that. Or sometimes we see articles on like longevity related to journals or maybe like some social media covering like this specific event. And this is very much just, all over the place. Nobody just presents the overall picture. How do we treat this whole thing? I want to give comments on this, and I want to show the people that, hey, this is happening. This is like important or not. And how does it fit in? Yeah. Does this longevity clinic actually acting in favor of radical life extension? Is this just a business? This is like a big piece of news, a lot of money is involved, or is it actually beneficial to our cause? They're like, is it just hype? Or is this hype? And all of the scientists are very unhappy with this hype, but it actually is beneficial for longevity cause, and why is it so? So we're gonna be covering these things right now. I think that's our major focus, and I think community is also gonna be engaged to some extent. We'll see how, though. That's why I said revenues. But before that, Save Forever was an attempt of running street campaigns in the format of street surveys. It went fine. Everyone was very happy with this. I know that both volunteers locally and longevity leaders were like, hey, that's great, finally some social activism, and the format is not embarrassing. It's actually about collecting data, and nice, we wanted more of that. But we just realized it's really hard to scale the thing. It requires a lot of work, like mine and some other people. It's like a full-time job, and it's not really growing naturally. So we kind of paused this street campaigns. We moved to Twitter, which I think is the right decision for us. If we want to create some cultural trends, you cannot avoid Twitter. It's just the place. So right now we're there, and this together with these news pieces and community building, that's our focuses right now.
And I want to, you mentioned something too, which I think is important. You were talking about the differences between the events that we throw and traditional conferences, and like one of our members, who's now the European director of LBF, he came with us to ARDD and to Dublin actually last summer, and he said, and his comment was like he doesn't have a biotech background, and he was like, not a single person presented any kind of coherent overview of the field. They were all just pitching their particular project, and me, like, I have no way of seeing how this all fits together.
Yeah, not even an attempt of connecting the dots. Like, I'm giving a talk, and this is related to the previous talk.
Yeah, how do they connect? Yeah, which is more important, which is less important, which is like, and which things are getting more funding versus less, and what's the relative like impact of the different things, and is there any actual relationship between how much funding something gets and what the potential impact is? And so that's something that we, to the degree that we do offer like sort of an educational aspect in the LBF, we actually do research on this, and we look at like what are the, like we did a survey of 400 people in the field, and we have a podcast, we've talked one-on-one with a lot of the researchers, and we're figuring out like what are all the different strategies that have been proposed for solving aging, what are the different technology paths that we need to pursue, and then what's the amount of funding that they're getting relative to their importance. And the interesting thing is there's basically an inverse relationship. how much impact a technology potentially can have is pretty much inversely proportional to how much funding it gets. Most money goes into small molecule pharmaceuticals that we actually know in the best case scenario will have a tiny effect. And other areas like gene delivery or replacement or reversible cryostasis, where you could actually imagine having huge effects on lifespan, the people doing that work struggle to get even the smallest amounts of money. So that's something that we highlight, and we want to really, shove that in people's faces. And actually, we want to and not only within our community, but going out. Like we went to synthetic biology beta last year, and we're going to go to other non-longevity conferences, and we're going to explain to people this situation, and and explain it to the funders, the investors, and say look, you guys are if you're interested in solving aging in your lifetime, the current distribution of resources is completely irrational, and I want to make sure that you understand that. And you can still decide to invest in those things if that's what you want to do, but I want to make sure you understand that it's not rational.
And of course, Aubrey de Grey has spoken about this as well, how neither academian or conventional for-profit businesses nor governments really have the correct incentives to invest in the really impactful areas of research and translation. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts about where exactly the incentives are misaligned and why it is that the highest impact fields that may also be higher risk or more uncertain, but they also
They're actually
have higher
less
promise.
risk and less uncertain in some cases, like with replacement and cryo. I think those are largely engineering problems with less technical risk than sort of approaches that pharma takes, and that's why it's so expensive to get a drug to market, is because most things don't actually work. But I think there's the pharmaceutical industry was built in the 20th century to solve the biggest problems health problems in the 20th century. It was infection, infant mortality, certain acute diseases, and it actually was pretty effective at finding some low-hanging fruit and solving certain problems. We have antibiotics, we have vaccines, we have hygiene, we have lots of cardiovascular drugs that are quite effective. And so we built this apparatus, but now if you want to tackle aging is a very different beast, right? And I think we built this giant apparatus that functions in a certain way, and now we're trying to try to apply it to aging just doesn't match. It's not the right tool for the job, and it takes a long time to change that, right? Because institutional change is slow, because there's people with jobs invested in their careers, and there's also investors get used to predictability, right? They can say how much money it'll cost to get a drug to market and what percentage will fail. There's a certain comfort level with the way things are done. So I think it's hard to overcome that and say, no, let's try something new, because that's, I guess, just different, it's weird, it's not as predictable. So I think that's a big part of the problem. I don't know if you have other views on that.
I think the majority of people still don't know about longevity field, still don't really understand
the
problems. I mean, I've just listened to this talk of Nobel laureates, got the Nobel Prize in molecular biology too, got interested in longevity field, wrote a book about longevity field, kind of scratched the surface there. I don't really argue the quality of how he looked into research itself, but then he also treats the field as a regular people do, bunch of billionaires. Yeah. And if the person of that kind of level of intellect and the capability of treating data critically still falls into this, it's that what do we expect from a majority of other people, majority of people in general? People don't know about the longevity field. They have a bunch of misconceptions about it. They see a bunch of information on press about billionaires as if we have so much funding now that we have this or that billionaire. Every billionaire is just blown out of proportion, every case.
Yeah, when the reality is out of the 6,000 billionaires, maybe 10 of them have put any money of a significant amount into longevity, and most of them it's like less than 0.1% of what they could be doing.
Yes. And I believe you're referring to Venki Ramakrishnan.
Yeah.
And I skimmed through portions of his book. I think he has some quite severe misrepresentations, for instance, of Aubrey de Grey and of transhumanism. So he equates transhumanism with mind uploading, which is a very, let's say, surface level misunderstanding that some people have. But he could have just read some of the literature from our community, I have to say, from 2013 called Transhumanism and Mind Uploading Are Not the Same, and he could have easily found it online. But I do wonder why you think some of these misconceptions persist, especially from someone who is clearly intelligent, who clearly is willing to put in the time to write a book on the subject. Why does he still gravitate toward these kinds of errors and then spreads them to the general public?
I mean, it's natural. How much time do you have to spend to actually understand the whole field? It takes time. Maybe it's us that are doing something wrong, obviously. We're doing something wrong with our messaging. And also, we're talking about a very basic thing. What do we think about life and death? And we only now we kind of want to shift it and change it completely. The whole mindset of the whole humanity has been built for thousands of years. We cannot just magically switch the mindsets of all the people on the planet. It's really hard, and nobody's treating it as a problem. Nobody's actually studying it properly. Nobody's actually collecting the data. Why do people think about death and life
and what's effective at communicating?
Why do they justify death all the time? I mean, we have like a list of reasons why some people in the field, like to list these things. But what do we do about them? Maybe there's like some more serious underlying process there that we haven't dig deep enough. I don't know. It's a very hard problem. It's the core of our culture as humans, the way we see death, and we need to. And what we need to do there, what we want to do there, is to change this core incentive of every human on the planet. This is maybe the hardest marketing task that humanity ever faced.
It would be like trying to convince people to not eat meat or to not drive cars or whatever, right? It's a very big ask, right? And I think so there's the broader public issue, but then even if you go within the longevity community, most people have never heard of Jean Hebert, right? Like even in the longevity community, like there's just people are usually just focused on whatever they started doing in the early career, and they're just like sort of narrow-mindedly focused on that, and so they don't have a coherent overview. They don't necessarily have a coherent plan that takes into account what are all the different scenarios, what are all the different paths we could go on, and how should we balance them. They're just focused on the thing that they by chance ended up working on, probably. And so I think we have a job to do educating not just the public, but also the longevity community itself, actually, on how it should be sort of allocating its attention and resources that it already has.
And then there's this huge argument whether we should talk about mortality, life extension, health extension, what words are like better words to say. And quite a lot of people in the field are going quite far with their safe wording, and it alters the whole messaging, and it actually harms the right type of research. And if you only speak about health extension, whatnot, it's not only the words that you're saying. It actually affects.
It's actually a form of deathism. It's a form of like saying that death is okay.
Basically.
Yes, and I do find some of that rhetoric unfortunate, especially when it comes to people explicitly saying, "Well, we're not after greater lifespan. We're just after greater health span."
Nobody even asked them about that, but this is the first thing they go and say from the stage when they're with some event is being run. Like, hey, just to start.
Just to make it clear.
We're
not talking about life extension.
Yeah. So these are usually representatives of the big longevity startups and companies, which is the saddest part.
Yes, and this absolutely does need to change. Now, Mark, you have spoken essentially about creating an army of researchers to fill some of the needed roles within the longevity field and get essentially more human energy and attention to a lot of these projects which are under-resourced right now. And of course, another component is finding people who are aligned with the goal of actual radical life extension or indefinite life extension or defeating death. And I wonder, you said it's hard to get most people to change, but there is a fraction of the population that...
It's receptive.
Yes.
Yeah, so the LBF itself, I think, so Open Longevity, I think, is different in this strategically, but the LBF focuses on what we call activating latent talent. So we don't try to change people's minds. We actually just try to find people that are like the top talented people in the world that are actually receptive to this. They just might not know much about it, and so we can actually bring them into the fold. And so that's what we focus on. And even if only 1 in 1,000 humans matches that criteria, that's still a lot of people, right? So we were trying to reach those people and then help make sure that they're having an impactful career, the most impactful career they possibly could have. Funding does become a limitation pretty quickly, though, is the problem, is because you can find all of these people, but they don't necessarily they can't self-fund this research, and the people that have the money and the resources are actually, there's a pretty small number of those people. So there's actually, this is something that we've been talking about a lot in collaboration with Vitalism recently, is like, to what degree can we actually change the minds of the current resource holders? Because they're actually, most of the wealth in the world is held by people that are pretty old, and so it's actually not unreasonable for them to not expect any of this to come to fruition in their lifetime. One might think they altruistically want to, still invest in it to benefit future generations, or even, be aggressive and try to make it happen fast enough for themselves. But the other idea is that maybe we just need a new generation of people that is, brought up in a new culture where these ideas are cool before they're wealthy, and then when they become wealthy, they actually start investing in it. And so I don't think it's an either or. We should be trying to do both, but I don't think we can count on the current wealth holders, that's for sure. We should be doing everything we can to try to redirect, and one of the examples is ARPA-H. We're trying to get some longevity-minded people into program manager positions at ARPA-H, because that could result in billions of dollars being directed towards industries that currently get, tens of millions of dollars that are critical path technology things. And so we should be trying to, we should actually try to be playing the game, right? Right now we're kind of sitting on the sidelines, the power brokers and the major things, like we're not even on the court, as Adam Grease put it recently. We're not even playing the game, we're kind of just on the sidelines. We should try to place some people on court, like by getting them into positions of power, like electing. You guys want to elect people. I know there was A4LI has had some success there. And it's like A4LI is basically one guy, right? Like if one guy can get law passed in like a state that's like non-insignificant, what if we put more effort into this? So I think there's definitely the potential to change and see some change in the power holders, but also like a new generation of power holders and wealth holders is probably necessary. And that's where the crypto community actually, I think one of the biggest benefits of the crypto sort of movement is that it's made some younger people wealthy, people that aren't, that maybe are more optimistic and more futurist oriented, wealthy, and some of them have chosen to invest in these types of technologies. But I think it's not enough. We need a lot more.
Yes, and you touched on many important points that I would like to explore further in this salon. But first of all, to any of our audience members who do not know who Jean Hebert is, please.
Behind is the book.
Over here. If you haven't read this book, read it. Also, buy a few extra copies and just leave them in hotel lobbies or your local hair salon. Just leave it on the table. It's a really, really important book. It's not the only important book in longevity, but it's probably, it describes the research of a guy who is, I think, maybe one of the, not anymore, but most underappreciated terms of strategies.
Yes, his book is called Replacing Aging, and the Transhumanist Party held a virtual enlightenment salon with him in April 2021, so please find that and watch that salon. I also moderated a panel where he was one of the presenters at RadFest in 2022, and you can find the stream of that panel on my YouTube channel as well. And Adam Grease is the co-founder of the Vitalism movement, and he has been a guest on one of our salons as well in August 2023, also a recent guest in the salon discussing the A4LI fly-in in Washington, D.C. And A4LI, of course, is the Alliance for Longevity Initiatives run by Dylan Livingston. So there are all of these parallel endeavors happening in the field, and it seems like there is, for each of these endeavors, one crucial individual who is driving it forward, at least in terms of that particular strand.
Yeah, one or a few, right? Like it's not many. And you mentioned like you've had him on, Foresight has had him talk, we've had him talk. He still struggles to get even the tiniest amounts of money, the tiniest amounts. Like every dollar is a struggle for him. So like we're failing at our jobs. Like that your organization, Open Longevity, LBF, if our job is to help these people get resources, so far we're failing.
Yes, actually,
do you have any thoughts on that?
I spoke to a young lady who essentially used to work for a large company that made venture capital investments in particular areas of technology. And this was a large conglomerate. She was in the ESG segment of that conglomerate, environmental, social governance types of matters, and she was trying to make the argument to her bosses that Jean Hebert's work is a valid ESG application because of the ways it would transform society for the better. Like if you have brain rejuvenation, replacement of essentially deteriorated brain tissue with new brain tissue that would lead people to be able to work longer, have more mental acuity.
I mean, work longer is maybe not the best pitch, but just like, maintain their capabilities.
Yes. But she was trying all of these arguments for how this could help the broader society, and one of her bosses was just having none of it based on what she related to me. She said essentially, this person was just saying, it has to be like about environmental activism or something about diversity or something very stereotypical like that. So a lot of these decision makers, they don't think outside the box. They have narrowly pigeonholed themselves based on their official job description or how a concept is stereotypically understood. And this may be a bottleneck unless you have people with sufficient resources who are independently minded and willing to deploy those resources and willing to do some trial and error as well. And I think some good examples of that are Vitalik Buterin, of course, who has invested a lot of money.
I don't know.
He did not invest anything, he just donated some to Sense.
But basically he threw Zulu. He hasn't invested in serious biotechnology research. He talks about it. He's done almost nothing.
What would you have him do if you could?
I would actually have him take some time to learn this stuff. Like, this is one of the problems with the people that have wealth, is that they have endless entertaining distractions, and in my experience they can't be bothered to actually put in the time to, like, they want things handed to them on a silver platter, like, this is a great investment, here you go. They don't want to read the papers, understand the field, come to the LBF camps. They can't be bothered, like, because they have endless entertainment. People are constantly asking them for money, so they're naturally on the defensive. It's kind of like I think being wealthy somehow sort of destroys your cognitive function in a sense. Because of that, you become defensive about your money because everyone's asking for it, and also you're so distracted that you don't actually ever spend enough time to learn anything, and make intelligent decisions about your money, with a few exceptions. Like there are mission-driven rich people like Elon Musk. He had his mission before he became wealthy, though. I think the thing is that after you've become wealthy, I haven't observed somebody to adopt a mission afterwards. They just become more defensive, right? So
just
it's like
Vitalik has a different mission. He has a different mission before he became
right.
wealthy.
I don't see him changing
He still has
that.
white paper for Ethereum, and he's still working on that. He still needs to finish that. In crypto community, he's very he's a very popular person because he's been going around preaching and actually fundraising for crypto community. He's a spokesperson. He does a lot for that. This is his major interest and focus. And longevity is just something he's kind of interested in, but for some reason he doesn't have time and I don't know, probably time and energy to read enough to understand it.
To make an intelligent decision about what to do about it.
I think he relies on other people to help him make some investment decisions, and so far he hasn't been happy with anything, so he hasn't been investing in anything. I probably would agree. I would donate more, not invest more. But again...
But also, if he doesn't understand the field himself, how is he going to pick people to manage his money well? Right? And this is the problem. Like Peter Thiel is the same. Like Peter Thiel claims to care about these things, doesn't actually spend any time on it, picks people to delegate it to who also don't understand it, but are happy to, be the money manager. So I think that this is a hypothesis. Like, I don't know, maybe it is possible to convert somebody after they're wealthy, but maybe you actually just need people that this was their top priority in their mission from the start to become wealthy. Otherwise, I don't know. Maybe that's the only way to get the investment we need. That's why we want to get people like Jean Hebert into ARPA-H, right? Like get people who already had this mission put into positions where they control lots of resources, whether it's because they make a lot of money in the private sector or because they got a particular position in the public sector.
Interesting. So
hypothesis. I don't know.
A few follow-up questions in that regard. Do you think whether an individual is self-made matters in this regard? Because, of course, self-made wealthy people had to work quite hard to reach that level of wealth. Does it matter how young they are when they become wealthy in a self-made manner? And furthermore, does it matter how they choose to lead their lives afterward? Because Vitalik, for instance, leads an essentially ascetic lifestyle. He is much more ascetic than I am, for example. He has a lot more money, but he seems to wear simple T-shirts and not really partake in any of the
he was probably like that
life.
before, presumably. I don't know, this is where, like, what Anastasia mentioned is, like, I could tell you my personal biases or, like, my anecdotes, my ideas, but, like, we should actually study this scientifically. Like, we should actually...
Well, why don't we guess? If this is the major bottleneck of the field, the lack of funding, and the perception of people in power, of us and other people too, why don't we properly study this? Why don't we ask them? Why don't we
and ask them maybe
find a way
directly
to ask them? Because if we don't actually can't ask them, that's not how you get the answers here. But we have to find a way. If this is the major bottleneck and we are dying, why aren't scientists treating this as a scientific project, as a problem? I don't know.
Now, Bill Andrews, who is, of course, 72, he's going to be 73 this year, and he spent his life essentially performing research in an attempt to cure aging. He's one of the world's leading telomere biologists, and he has said that one of his biggest regrets is that he didn't make a bunch of money in a completely unrelated field so as to be able to self-fund later on, because he said to me, and he said this during our virtual enlightenment salon in October 2021, so please watch that. He had a lot of thoughts about essentially some of the pitfalls of external investors and how his investors disappointed him during the Great Recession and essentially pulled their support of Sierra Sciences, he was able to buy them out ultimately, and he has maintained sole control of Sierra Sciences since that time, but he hasn't been able to scale his operation because he's so wary of external investors essentially dictating terms to him. And as a result, he said he wished he had made a lot more money. Right.
Yeah, it's hard though, because I think, a lot of people end up with a lot of money because that's actually what they're passionate about. Like making money is their passion. That's how they get there. If your passion is longevity, like making money might be hard for you to do because that's not your passion, right? Like it's hard work. To become a billionaire is really hard work. So like you actually really have to like be able to like get up early every day and like push hard on long hours. And if making money is not actually what motivates you like deeply inside, then that might not actually work. You might just fail at it. So
yeah, it's not that easy that, oh, I forgot, last year I should have started a multi-billionaire company, right? How did I forget? It's not that easy. Like, yeah, we're doing the things that we're doing because we're interested in it and we're good at it. Like, I don't know, if we could become millionaires, we probably would have maybe turned an exception with like crypto. We could have bought a bunch of Bitcoin.
That's gambling, speculative gambling. Yeah. And some people did, and a few of those people are putting money into. But that's again the psychology, right? Like the people that went into crypto didn't go into it because they cared about longevity, right? Like I worked on Longevity Biotech startups for 20 years because I cared about longevity.
Yes.
Right. Like so, like you tend to work on what if you have that luxury. I mean, most people don't have that luxury. Most people just have to pay the bills. But if you do have the luxury of choosing what you work on, you tend to work on what you care about, because that's what actually can cause. Like otherwise, you wouldn't work. If you have the luxury of not working, you probably just won't. Right? Like you'll pursue what you actually are passionate about. But yeah, maybe we should. I mean, this is a serious conversation that I've been having with some other people in the field. Like maybe, we make fun of Brian Johnson's selling olive oil supplements because we know that that's not gonna like have a significant effect on lifespan. But maybe more of us should be doing that, because if the people who actually have the right ideas don't generate their own wealth, maybe we won't be able to convince the current wealthy people to do anything.
Yes, and I've said this before, I still regret that I did not purchase at least some quantity of Bitcoin back in 2011 when I could have, or I could have even devoted some of my spare computing power to mining Bitcoin instead.
Hindsight is best.
We'll record the whole podcast.
What's the current trend that we're not picking up on? Maybe I should just liquidate all my assets and buy Dogecoin. I don't know, but I don't know.
I had some Dogecoin. I sold it in 2017 before Elon boosted it. I thought I had a nice little low four-figure windfall from selling.
But those people that invest in cryptos, because most of them were like libertarians of some sort or another, right? Like it wasn't because of longevity, and they did it like they were choosing to do it even though it was risky. Like it wasn't, you couldn't have foreseen ahead of time that it would succeed. They did it because of ideology, right? And it's like, so yeah, I don't know. Like there's probably something like that right now that we should all be investing in, and we just don't know what it is. I mean, if I could have shares in SpaceX or OpenAI, I'd love to, but fortunately that's not an easy thing to get.
Is there some sort of decision-making heuristic that perhaps could expose one a bit to the upside of these developments without being intimately familiar with them or closely involved in those fields? Like, I'm not suggesting people mint their own crypto tokens or start developing their own large language models, but do you think there's a way to kind of diversify one's pursuits enough to capture these upsides while still focusing primarily on what one is best at or most passionate about, and in the field of longevity, where one can contribute the most?
it seems like all just luck to me. I don't know. I mean, at least, yeah, like with the crypto thing, that just seems like luck. They did it because of ideology and they got lucky. Yeah, I don't know, but that's not my area. Making money is not my area of expertise.
Yeah. Yeah, we just recently had a talk in Open Longevity about it, like crypto. Hey, let's take a closer look at crypto again, yet again, and maybe we'll have like some passive income and I mean just exactly those things that you're saying right now. Let's just find a way of passive or semi-passive income to be focused to afford to be focused on what's actually important in longevity. Yeah, it's still a question. We don't really know. We're all of us in longevity field. We're raising the same question: how do we actually survive? What do we eat? And how do we make our projects, go further into the future and actually finish some research or whatever? It's just.
I mean,
really
the current one is obesity drugs, right? Like BioAge, in theory, is an aging company. At least that's why it was started. But if they are financially successful, it's not because they did anything to help aging. It's because they have a combo that goes well to help muscle loss with these like new obesity drugs, right? Like so, but that wasn't what they set out to do. It's just basically a fluke. The same thing with like Synthego. I was like the co-founder, I was on the founding team of Synthego, and we came up with we wanted to reduce the cost of manufacturing DNA and RNA, and eventually, and then build a stack of things on top of that to do genome engineering. That was the plan from the beginning, but CRISPR didn't exist when we started, and then CRISPR came along, and all of a sudden people needed super high quality, really long RNAs, which previous to that there was no market for, and we just happened to have a machine that could do that. Just like we didn't know that was going to be necessary, we just happened to have built it, and all of a sudden we became like the main source for buying RNAs for CRISPR. It was pure luck.
This is interesting. And I just hope there are enough people in our movement who are sufficiently lucky.
I mean, grow the movement and hope that, because some percentage of them will be lucky, so grow the movement.
Yes. So speaking of growing the movement, what attributes do you look for in people who you think are going to stay devoted to the mission? Like if you invest resources in them and they go on and build a company or get some sort of position like at ARPA-H, that you can be confident that they will use those resources to actually advance the field rather than pivot to something else or be enticed by power or influence. What are some criteria that you look for or traits that you look for?
I don't know if I should tell you because that's part of our filtering process for who we accept into the program.
Well, for example, do you look for longevity in the community, like people who have been around for a long time and they want to do something more? Or do you look for some sort of...
That's a different question. I mean, the LBF is trying to grow the community,
right.
So we're targeting people who have high talent and relevant skill sets, but aren't already working on longevity, because you don't grow the community by focusing on the people that are already in the community.
Fair enough. What about people, say, in adjacent fields who have shown some sort of track record?
We usually go for people that are in adjacent fields, but who have at least, like if you looked at their LinkedIn, maybe they liked a post related to longevity or something like that. So like that they're not anti-longevity, right? And so like that's actually a lot of what I do in order to find candidates for the LEF is I just browse LinkedIn for people that look like they're really talented, and then have in their post history they have liked something by somebody I think who was doing something useful in the longevity field. Like that's a really good. That could probably be automated actually. That's maybe a project that we should put somebody on. Like literally look through the entire LinkedIn database for everybody who has liked something related to longevity, and then have some kind of scoring system for how talented we think they are, and then actively recruit those people.
Interesting. So somebody actually looks at
I do this manually.
Wow.
Me. personally. I've spent 12 hours in a day once doing that.
So I've typically told candidates who are looking for jobs.
I'm just really proud of that, Mark.
Hey, that's how LBF0 was a success. Actually, basically everybody at LBF0. I think 90% of them were people that I actually just found on LinkedIn and messaged and said, "Hey, I'm doing this thing. It looks like you might be interested."
That is a lot of effort, but you get to know people very well.
I almost burned out. I almost had a mental breakdown.
Oh, wow. But I keep telling job seekers, for instance, not to be too worried about their social media presence unless it's something egregious, because most employers, prospective employers, won't take the time to look beyond just a surface level. But there is an exception, and that is Mark. Mark will look at your social media presence.
Yeah, this should be automated. Now that you mention it, if it's possible to automate it, it's difficult though.
But that's
a lot of it is gut intuition I've developed. Like I just and it's hard to encode that, but it's probably possible.
But that's an important function within our community as well. Essentially, vetting people, especially to rule out serious downsides. And of course, in a political party, we've been more exposed to this than perhaps in more strictly scientific pursuits, because the problem of entryism, especially in smaller political movements, is well known. People, especially who splinter off from larger political or social movements but still have some allegiance to them, may try to co-opt one's own movement.
I guess I will say, a lot of movements get co-opted. I mean, the longevity movement, some people argue, is being co-opted right now by the health and wellness industry. And I guess, that's one criteria that we definitely do look for, is people that are more motivated by the goal than they are by necessarily just winning, right? Like, we want people with a collaborative mindset that that goal number one is not dying, and everything else is just a means to that end, in a sense, and that you know that you have to work with others in order to achieve that effectively.
Yes, and this collaborative outlook during the early years of the longevity community, which you're quite familiar with, of course, has been prevalent, but it does seem like
it's surprisingly prevalent given the scarcity of resources. Normally when you have an extreme scarcity of resources, which is what we have, people tend to be less collaborative, right? Like, that's a natural instinct. In scarcity, it's like you just try to get what you can, and you try to prevent other people from getting it, because that's the only way you survive. So I would say, given the extreme scarcity that we face, people are more collaborative than you would expect. But of course, there still is people who try to protect their sources of funding. That is a thing that happens. Maybe a bit less in longevity than other industries. Although I feel like maybe it's getting worse over time. I feel like maybe it was more collaborative in the past, and because it was so scarce that it was just absurd. And so but now that there is some money flowing in, there's starting to become some. I've observed some people to become protective of their funding sources in a way that is a net negative for the field as a whole, I think.
Yes, and there have been some concerning episodes in the past few years. I won't mention specifics,
let's not get into
but
the politics. I like to stay neutral on that, but there definitely have been.
Yes,
and they're very obviously money motivated.
And indeed, when I was in Dublin in 2022, I posed this question to Stephanie Danow, who's the executive director of Lifespan.io, because she spoke about the evolution of the longevity industry, and I asked her essentially, how do we prevent the longevity field from becoming more cutthroat, the way we've seen, say, in the mRNA vaccine field, where during the height of the pandemic, Moderna sued Pfizer for patent infringement, even though I thought at the time there should have been an attitude of all hands on deck to defeat this virus. Yes, and she essentially said that in her view, this is just kind of the natural dynamic.
And there's nothing you can do about it.
Right. And I'm hopeful that there is a better answer for our field, because if it becomes a matter of essentially turf wars and companies just guarding their intellectual property rather than trying to get knowledge out there.
There are counterexamples, but they're all sort of wartime economy type things. They're like when a nation is facing a disaster and they just come together and they say, we're putting the rules aside because the rules are in the way of us actually succeeding. Right? Like it tends to only happen in that. Like if there was a meteor heading towards Earth that NASA spotted and we're like, oh shit, like if we don't blow up this meteor, we're all going to be dead. Of course, people would drop. IP would cease, like the government would probably say, there's no more IP. Anything that can help, we're allowed to use. It doesn't matter. Like, right? And like, it would be nice to think that we would do something like that for aging, since like it's the same situation effectively. We're all dying. We're all, death is coming for all of us right now, but we're not treating it that way because we're just used to it.
I think that people are motivated more by the cause, like, hey, we need to stay alive.
Right.
That's the most important thing, and us earning the money, that's kind of, that can wait, maybe later in the future. They will be more collaborative, and they are. I can tell it, I can see it. And people that are kind of, okay, probably not going to happen in my lifetime, at least I will earn something. Yes, they fight for resources, this is their major motivation there.
Yeah. Although then
that's obviously there are some exceptions. That's not just a black and white thing, but I mostly trust people that actually want to solve aging within their lifetime, preferably.
Right.
They move faster. They makes like I think more interesting decisions too. But
sometimes,
not
always,
yeah.
Yes, and of course, for me, that has been the predominant motivation, essentially, ever since I learned about the work of Aubrey de Grey. Now, ever since I was a child, I believed that death was wrong and something should be done about it, but it was when I learned about the SENS approach that I realized this is attainable within my lifetime, and I definitely shifted my allocation of time. Now, not to the same extent as people who have, for instance, dedicated their entire careers to the field, because I try to essentially protect myself against possible downsides through a very conventional career. But still, a lot of my time and money that career provides gets spent on longevity advocacy. And I find that a lot of the people in open longevity have that kind of dedication. So you have actually quite a few people in your organization that perform these activism-oriented tasks, and it seems that they do it purely for the cause.
Yeah, absolutely. They call themselves transhumanists, Salon, that's how they motivate it. Otherwise, they will be doing something else, and they spend their majority of time there.
Yeah, you don't pick this path because it's the easy one.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, but I sometimes feel like it's really the only one, at least given the way that I look at the world, and that's not to talk about any specific resource or time allocation, but having that as the goal, because what is the alternative? And I'm not a religious person, I don't believe in any sort of afterlife, and I don't believe that you live on through your children or your legacy, because that's just a very indirect connection that will fade very quickly for most people.
Yeah, people are, I named like the nonprofit that the LBF, actually the nonprofit's name is Less Death, which is a reference to less wrong, so the altruist movement. And I've been a little bit confused by them. It seems like they get a little bit overly philosophical sometimes, because it's just like, yes, there's all these existential risks, but like you keep seeming to forget about the one that's 100%. Like, these other ones are not 100%, and you seem to be a lot more concerned with ones that are less than 100%. The division of the way that attention is allocated is it's kind of, I don't know, I think humans are really good at like telling really complicated intellectual stories to justify something that they believed in, that it's not, they're not arriving at. They had the pre-existing desire to focus on something, and then they just come up with a really complicated justification for it. So you would like to think that a group called effective altruists would care about empirical data more. That's what they claim. And yet, yes, the thing that is 100% certain going to kill you is not a priority for them.
Yes.
For completely different reasons too.
Yeah.
Some say that, hey, longevity field is actually getting enough resources, it's very well funded, again, they fall in the same pitfall there. And the others like, no, this is not a
if anybody looked into the data.
Yeah, it's not a good enough cause, it's like about wealthy people getting even like their life is gonna be even better. We will go and find, save children in Africa. That's what we people in California should be focused on, obviously.
Yes, I have been a vocal critic of effective altruism in recent years. I understand the initial impetus for it, but it has definitely evolved or devolved into a kind of doomsday cult that I think overestimates existential risk from AGI.
Yeah, I mean, even if like whatever percentage you give it, it's still less than 100%.
Right. And I've seen people make ridiculous arguments, like even if it's like 1 times 10 to the negative 7th probability, and they can reduce it somewhat because the payoff is so huge, it's
for
worth
these
it.
Imaginary future humans, right? But like, not worrying that much about the people that are alive and are going to suffer and die.
Yes, absolutely. And then, of course, there was this whole recent fiasco with OpenAI, where it seems that the former board of that organization, out of this effective altruist ideology, tried to oust Sam Altman. And Sam Altman, of course, is an investor in some longevity startups as well, so I do think his motives are in the right place. But the effective altruists on the board, it seems to me, we're just worried about the pace of progress. It wasn't specific.
I've heard mixed things about what actually happened there. I don't know if anybody actually knows what really was the reason. It might have just been personal disagreement. But Sam, I think, would be an example of a different movement that's growing, which would be called effective accelerationism. Mm-hmm. It's like we have serious problems and we could be moving faster to solve them. Yes. Rather than, it's sort of like the FDA is mandated to prevent harm, but there's no part of the FDA that accounts for the harm of slowing things down, right? So that's not part of their equation. The harm of slowing things down is there's no negative impact, there's no incentive for them to consider that. And I think effective altruists are maybe not considering the harm of slowing things down. It's the same way that environmentalists didn't realize that, protesting nuclear power would mean that we would just build more coal power plants, and so they basically shot themselves in the foot, right? Like, I think the same thing is happening where effective altruism is sort of just shooting themselves in the foot because they're like overreacting and overprotecting and not accounting for the harm of slowing things down.
Yes, and I completely agree with you on that. I have a lot of sympathies with effective accelerationism. I think it reflects, to a great extent, the transhumanist pro-actionary principle, where you consider the benefits and risks not just of an innovation, but of doing nothing. Often you'll find that doing nothing poses the greatest risk.
Yeah, and that's almost never talked about.
And of course, Vitalik has actually written on the subject. He classifies himself as what he calls DAC, which is like a defensive accelerationism, where he looks out for some of the risks and potential pitfalls, but he recognizes the value of accelerating these
and it's not
technologies.
as if anybody is saying we should ignore the risks. But that's a bit of a straw man argument, so you can get into subtle philosophical differences there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I do think generally the thrust in all of these accelerationist subcultures is one that our society badly needs, including in the realm of infrastructure. it's been said often we've had a lot of progress in the world of bits, not so much in the world of atoms, and so we're still living with infrastructure from the mid-20th century largely, and it's well past time for that to change. Now, I wanted to also ask you, Mark, you have a new podcast with Nathan Chang. Could you tell us a bit about that and what you hope to achieve with it?
It's a good segue because it's called the Longevity Acceleration Podcast, and we've even thought about renaming the LBF the Longevity Acceleration Fellowship instead of Longevity Biotech Fellowship, because actually a lot of what's important is not label biotech, it might be like computational advances. But yeah, we have a podcast now which is to talk to the relevant experts doing technology development that we think is important, and then we are building this technical roadmap to solving aging, and we're getting their feedback on it by asking them what's their mental model for how we're going to solve aging, and we see how it differs or is similar to our roadmap that we're building, and we integrate that information, and we do that. And it's long form interviews, like 2-3 hours, sort of like Lex Fridman style, but focused entirely on what are the technology paths to solving aging entirely. And so yeah, anybody who's doing the relevant technology and is willing to admit that that's actually a desirable goal is somebody that we want to talk to, and we have a long queue of those people. But episodes, I think we just released an episode just 2 days ago, so look it up on the longbiofellowship.org website. It's the Longevity Acceleration Podcast. You can actually find it on any podcast platform.
Yes, that's excellent, and I did listen to your opening episode.
Episode 0, yeah.
Yes.
That's where we explain what the purpose of it is.
Mm-hmm. So, highly recommended podcast, and I wish you all the best with it. Speaking of roadmaps, and you had mentioned this before, one of the benefits of attending one of the LBF meetings is that one gets essentially a roadmap, or at least a clear understanding.
Well, we present our current best roadmap, but then when you come to one of the events, we put you to work, actually. So you're going to be helping us improve it, because, yeah, it's not just mine or Nathan's or anyone else's particular set of favorite projects. Like I said, we interviewed, or we surveyed 400 people, we've interviewed over 50. This is a collaborative effort to build this. So if you come to one of our things, we're going to tell you what we've managed to accumulate so far, but we're also asking for your input.
And of course, a well-articulated roadmap can be tremendously influential to give people an overview of what is happening in the field, how far we are along in particular pathways. I'm reminded of the lifespan.io rejuvenation roadmap that I think was one of the best of its kind when it was developed. The SENS Research Foundation had something along these lines before Aubrey's departure from it. I think it has kind of, let's say, slowed down since that time.
It hasn't changed, updated much. Yeah, then there's the hallmarks of aging. I think all of the other roadmaps, and Foresight has a tech tree as well. They actually aren't really roadmaps, I think. Semantically, that's the wrong word for them. They all are just categorization systems for the existing efforts. Whereas what we're trying to do is work from first principles. What are the different plausible technology paths? So it's a little bit of a different way of thinking about it. Yeah, the previous ones I think have mostly been categorization systems.
Yes, it's interesting.
And I think that I know that Open Longevity also has a roadmap. I don't know how you guys...
Tell us about the Open Longevity roadmap.
Oh god, we haven't updated it for several years now. We had two actually. One was more technical, a list of things, a list of important things to do. And the other was like a roadmap, how do we look at the field, what directions do we take and not take. You have to make certain decisions, where not to spend your time on, but yeah, it's been several years since we updated the roadmap, and I'm really happy that we don't have to do this anymore. Really.
It's hard work.
If LBF is gonna do the technical roadmap, I don't see any other people who would do it better now. obviously it's a lot of work. A lot of work has been done already, and even more has had to be done. On top of
got
that,
1,000 hours of that.
So yeah,
in the next year probably.
That requires a lot of funding and people, but yeah, I'm pretty confident that this will be done properly, technical part. But I think the roadmap that you are working right now, we also have to...
We're specific technical only.
Yeah, we have to also substitute with other types of things, other types of questions that have to be answered in the field. This funding question that will be a great bottleneck for the whole technical roadmap, obviously. And technical roadmap wouldn't be even asking the question of funding. And maybe like cultural bottleneck. Hey, people don't really treat it as a problem, or they see it like in some certain like flawed way. How do we fix that? Is this a bottleneck or not? And some others maybe. So I think other nonprofits, this is what I would love to see in the field, like LBF, Longevity, Tahoe, A4LI, some others, will collectively just decide which part of this massive roadmap and puzzle we will take on, and we'll just, divide and conquer. And also this will be better for the picture of longevity movement from the outside. Like, hey, it's not that we're fighting for resources, we actually coordinated, and we understand who's responsible for what. If you want to fund this type of work, you're funding like LBF. If you want to fund this type of work, you fund A4LI, and so on and so forth. But this requires a lot of coordination work in between us. And I don't know, maybe we need to run a specific non-profits conference or like a work coordinations and a workshop, something like that. I don't really want any conferences, people just talking about their old things. I mean, we all know a number of celebrities in longevity that is traveling from one conference to another, giving yet another talk on their favorite topic, whatever. We only need workshops now.
Yeah.
Set a topic, in several months, you and you, we all try and solve this question. Do your homework, come, maybe do it publicly, the workshop, yeah, sure. But we need to collectively think about something. How do we solve this problem, Otherwise, it's just I don't know, we're not moving anywhere.
Yeah, so the LBF is focused on the high-level first principles thinking on the technical side. Open Longevity, Anastasia is very interested in some of these social questions. I think there's only one organization right now that I think is making a credible attempt at being the sort of the top level one above all of these things, and that would be vitalism. So I think that it's not an easy job to take on because you have to balance a lot of different people with competing interests and decide who counts as a vitalist and who doesn't, and there's a lot of interesting questions there. And what's the scope? You don't want the scope to be too big. Are you including uploading? Are you not? But I would say the one org that is at least making a credible attempt at being the very top level or coordinator is potentially vitalism. And so if you think that's important, you should at least check them out and talk to them.
Yes, and of course, to our audience members, please check out our Salon with Adam Grease, and we're hoping to check back in with him and Nathan Chang later this year.
I mean, I'm a self-declared vitalist. It's on my LBF and my Twitter, and I think anybody who agrees with their declaration should just do the same thing. They should say I'm a vitalist. It's like saying that you're a scientist. It just means that you have a shared value system. You don't have to pay them any money or go to any of their organization events. You can just say I'm a vitalist, and it's maybe that's a useful thing. If we can have a name for our movement that's not co-opted, right? Longevity doesn't mean much anymore. There's healthspan, there's all the other words, but vitalism is actually trademarked, and so they can actually, if somebody tried to say they're a vitalist and when they clearly are not, Vitalism Foundation can sue them and say you're not allowed to call yourself a vitalist because you don't agree to the Vitalist Declaration.
And the Vitalist Declaration is quite concise.
Yeah, it's very.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, it's basically saying that death is bad and aging should be a priority. It's pretty simple.
Right, and of course I agree with every word of it. Again, please look up the Vitalist Declaration. I think if you are interested in living dramatically longer than humans live today, you will also agree with every word of the Vitalist Declaration.
And you can be a member. I think they've made it so that it's pay what you can. It can be $1 a year, it can be $1,000 a year, or whatever. I mean, and that money doesn't pay anybody. That just goes to like projects that need doing.
Interesting. So, since we're on the subject of funding, and you've mentioned limitations within the longevity community, I know several years ago, Aubrey de Grey was saying that funding is no longer the greatest bottleneck. Talent was the greatest bottleneck, and you are, of course, working on alleviating that bottleneck as well. But even he has said, with regard to funding, it's a kind of nuanced question because there is a lot more funding coming in, but it's sometimes not coming into the right organizations.
I think he said that because he was getting a lot of funding at the time. So there's the immediacy. What's the right? Is it immediacy bias or like?
Yeah.
You were mentioning it there, like he happened to be getting a lot of money at the time,
And also,
so he felt good about
taking
things.
an interview with him back then. He was pretty happy with how things are in longevity.
Yeah.
Well,
now maybe he wouldn't say the same thing. And I think, I don't think we've ever been in a case of abundance of talent or resources. We're still orders of magnitude off of what would be required if we were seriously trying to solve this problem in our lifetimes.
And of course, always the inveterate optimist, even when he is
naive
facing
optimism can
challenges.
be useful. It can be a useful trait, right? Because sometimes you might not even try.
But Aubrey has pulled off some remarkable feats sometimes in attracting funding, often after some serious setbacks, like that huge $27 million airdrop that the SENS Research Foundation received came shortly before Aubrey was, in my view, unjustly expelled from it, and he had to fight a battle, essentially, to regain access to some of those funds.
I mean, I don't want to get into the particulars of that because it's complicated, but that's $27 million is a drop in the bucket, right? Like, it's just, that's still scarcity situation.
So I have said before that if I personally had $1 billion, I could essentially transform human civilization and put us in the transhuman era.
Yeah, would it take many billionaires to, if there was just a couple of them that decided to take this seriously, good? Yeah, it may be huge.
Because
so far down the path.
There are projects that are not that expensive that can make a huge impact. So let's say you had a billionaire in the room right now and you could make a pitch to that person to the effect of, this is going to be pocket change for you, but here are a few projects that you could spend, say, 5 figures or 6 figures on, and there could be a significant impact to the future of humanity in the longevity field that you, billionaire, are going to find quite beneficial as well.
Yeah, so it's hard to pick just 5 projects or something, but what we want to do with the roadmap is sort of create an index fund of all of the important projects, and so you could actually, with weights applied to them, and you could say, hey billionaire, we've invested huge amounts of our own time, we've consulted with every expert in the field, this is the best available plan that humanity has currently, and if you put money into it, we're actually trying to raise a fund right now, which we're maybe calling the Roadmap Fund or the Longevity Acceleration Fund, and it would effectively, people as LPs could put money into it, and it would distribute to all of the projects on the roadmap with weights associated with them, and that would just be continuously updated. I mean, off the top of my head, I would say that there are a couple gene delivery replacement and cryostasis projects that are underfunded and that are potentially major high impact things, but there are also people that are not necessarily public about what they do, so I don't want to name the names, but if there was a billionaire that was interested, we could make those introductions.
And suppose you had this billionaire in the room and this billionaire asked, well, how do I choose people if I don't have the time to manage this money or how it's spent? How do I choose people who are knowledgeable about the field, who will allocate it wisely, who won't just, say, divert the money to pet causes?
I mean, we're trying to build social capital with the LBF as a large organization, as a large, well-connected organization, and so hopefully they'll, like, the social capital we accumulate will be enough that they'll just decide that we're somebody worth delegating to. But honestly, I think that if they actually care about this issue, they should actually spend some time on it. Like, I think that the probability of them making a good decision of who to delegate to, if they're not willing to spend some actual time and energy to understand it, chances are they're going to choose the wrong person.
So they should go to one of the LBF events.
Yeah. I mean, and other people's events too. So,
yeah, some high network events. Some rich people actually end up going to like Berkeley and get another degree to understand the science of it. Yeah, and most of the people who actually do something important in the field, they end up spending quite a lot of time, their personal time, on self-education.
Interesting.
But there are a few people I would recommend from a technical perspective. I mean, me and Nathan, yes. I think Andrew Steele to some degree, although I think he's maybe a bit conservative. Alex Colville at age 1, I feel like knows his shit. Joe Lacroix retro is, I mean, he's a little bit more, I would say, optimistic about the timeframes for AGI helping us than I am. So there's definitely people in the field that I can recommend that I think are smart and don't necessarily agree with me on anything. But that's what the roadmap is. Like, me and Nathan don't even agree on everything. So, like, the roadmap includes things that I think are very important that Nathan doesn't, and there's a few things on there that neither of us think are important, but enough other people do that we include it.
Interesting. So I want to ask each of you, and there's no correct answer because you're prognosticating about the future, so we don't know who's going to be right about this, but what do you think of Aubrey's probabilistic estimate that we have about a 50% probability of reaching longevity, escape velocity, 12 to 15 years from now, and he has said that during the early 2010s he felt like his original time frame had been slipping because progress was a bit slow, but he feels that in recent years,
making up for that deficit.
Right.
I think that's true, but I would have started with a lower estimate. So I would have started with an estimate of less than 1%, probably much less than 1%, and actually over 20 years, I'd say the estimate was declining, and now it's maybe back to that original, some less than 1%, probably a lot less, but not zero. Whereas I was starting to feel like it was approaching just effectively zero, and now I'd say it's less than 1%, but not effectively zero. But I wouldn't say much for me at my age. Like, of course, for every person, 20 years makes a big difference. I'm going to be 40. Somebody who's 20 right now, I might say they have closer to a 50% chance. But
interesting. And I am closer to your age than I am to 20, so I hope you're being over pessimistic. But what do you think?
Maybe I'm 0.5% more optimistic than Mark, but really not that much. I think at the pace that we have right now, we are very much reliable on, black swans happen. A number of black swans have to happen, something major things in culture,
the
and also
and
CRISPR level inventions, out of a sudden we have this and that. Then maybe. AI is indeed developing very fast.
But it's still pretty terrible when it comes to most of the things we care about in science.
AI is great at being creative, like the generative AI art models are amazing at suggesting ideas. Sometimes in terms of the execution or the precise details, they're still a bit lacking.
In this, AI is going to be fantastic in all of those spaces where it had data before.
Right.
That's why it's that great with pictures and with text.
Language,
but not with biotech. There is no data.
And who's going to pay for it, right? Like the reason AlphaFold exists is because governments around the world spent over $20 billion generating X-ray crystallography data, and Google spent like $20 million to just train an algorithm to like interpret and like pattern match, right? But like Google didn't spend $20 billion generating that data, and aging is a lot more complicated than the protein folding problem. The actual data that we need to model aging is not something that, I mean, that's even if all the billionaires got on board, they might not have enough money. We actually need to generate better tools to generate data at lower cost and higher quality. And there's actually no institution that thinks of that as its responsibility right now, except maybe sort of the NSF.
Yeah, they are developing tools.
Yeah, but that's small potatoes compared to what's necessary. Yeah. So we need so the amount of so like you can do these really cool things with data and images and even movies because there's unlimited free data. Biological data is expensive, and most of what exists is actually garbage. So garbage in, garbage out.
Interesting. So what I actually used my spare computing resources on back in 2011 when I could have mined Bitcoin was protein folding simulations. So I was a participant in Rosetta at home and folding at home, and I climbed the leaderboards quite a bit for those projects, actually. And I was thinking at the time, okay, my computing power is actually being devoted to real meaningful scientific research, and with Bitcoin...
just got trumped by a black swan that came along.
Right. Yeah. So AlphaFold
has been like the most powerful supercomputer during COVID in the world. Yeah, it actually was. It was pretty impressive. Humanity is not that awful when you actually need to solve something. Humans are, collecting and doing something together. That's pretty cool. But they had a tool. Someone built the thing.
Made it easy for them.
Yeah.
Yes. So AlphaFold essentially rendered obsolete the need for people like me to run these simulations on their computers.
It hasn't 100% solved the problem. Actually, that is definitely an overestimate. But
interesting. So you still see
more
progress to be made in that area.
Oh, for sure. I mean, because it's all it's doing is pattern matching them. So if you give it a protein that is significantly different than anything that's in its training data, it just gives you garbage. And this is easily verifiable.
Interesting. So perhaps there's still a point to dedicating your spare computing power to these kinds of simulations.
Well, molecular dynamics simulations, right? Because that's the thing that you want to avoid, but is right, you do molecular dynamics because you haven't figured out a shortcut around it, but it's so computationally expensive, right?
So I wanted to ask you in closing for our salon, what are you most hopeful about in the next several years? Any ongoing developments that you think could be these kinds of black swans, or at least push the field forward significantly so that your own probability estimates might be increased a bit if they succeed?
If some vitalists or otherwise transhumanists, whatever term they prefer, become wealthy and decide to dedicate that wealth to it, that would be one. A breakthrough in gene delivery would be another one, and I don't think it's going to be an incremental improvement on any of the existing methods that are in clinical trials. I think it'll be a completely different method, which is a 3-hour-long conversation in itself. I think a demonstration of whole body transplantation in animals that actually extends lifespan could be a big one, although I don't know if that would be a net positive or a net negative. It could end up, where people react badly to it, and actually we end up in an overregulated environment where they start to ban certain types of research that are critical path. So yeah, I don't know.
Anastasia, any thoughts?
I still believe that agent is encrypted in trust crypto somewhere. I mean, it has to be somewhere there. So if we manage to gain this data cheaper and faster, that would be cool. Automation of experiments, like we have worm bots by Aura Biomedical. It's great that they are testing this on worms, but we need other animals. Worms are this horrible model, obviously. Even the mouse is a horrible model. But all this automatic system, and with the citizen science on top, which they are trying to do, which is kind of cool. Let's try and do that. Automate maybe genetic alterations on different types of animals. And I really like this cryopreservation project. What's the term? They're working on cryopreservance. They're not working on the cryopreservation of whole bodies, but just organs. But the development itself of cryopreservance this way would be pretty cool.
Yeah, I think if somebody froze a small mammal and thawed it and it was still fully functional and didn't have any reduced remaining lifespan, that would definitely be an inflection point.
That would be major. What do you think just about the public relations impact of having a human reach the age of 123, or even having the second human ever reach the age of 120?
That already happened.
Yeah.
Well, Jean Calment died past 122, but she didn't get to
Although
123.
we have to
Really
verify
matter
that
if
she was
22 or
actually,
23.
she might not have been that old. That's a debatable
No,
one.
that
But even, I mean, mathematically, it's like, you get outliers.
We will have more people living longer and longer. This will just look naturally. Like, hey, medicine is just getting better.
Yeah.
This is not changing the
It's
picture
not
at all. This is like
revolutionary.
a natural things, but people won't change their minds about anything. Yeah, okay, medical doctors are doing their job properly.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Let's do it more.
Yeah, it doesn't help with solving it.
I suppose a better demonstration would be if Bill Andrews had succeeded in his goal of getting Betty White, who died at the age of 99, to look like she was 25 again.
What I want is I want a TV show, the scale of Game of Thrones, that will actually talk about new values. The value of human life, the value of people that are already alive. This is more important than some abstract as humanity or unborn people like all the future. We need to talk about these things more in culture. If we'll manage to create a hit, present new rhetorics, new values, the ways right now there are certain things that you should never talk about in public. This is just unacceptable. Say it's unacceptable to pay women like less than men. That's still happening, but there these things you cannot be arguing like against them.
Yeah.
Or
being pro-death became unacceptable.
Yeah, you and like the number of other things. Left the movement, they're very, very loud, and they're affecting how people are hiring, how people are managing huge corporations in the end. So we need to be more active about building these new rhetorics. What are the right things to be said and acted on?
Yes, and you both offered some great ideas to hopefully develop upon and devote some activist efforts toward, both in terms of longevity technologies as well as cultural and societal transformations and advocacy. And of course in the U.S. we're interested in all of these areas. Is there anything else you would like to share with our audience that you think is important?
Yeah, we covered a lot there. I don't know, I'll just close by saying that if you have technical skills that are relevant to solving aging, and you could, if you're not sure if you do, feel free to reach out to the LBF because we can advise you on that. And you might want to consider joining if you want to get involved in non-technical roles. I think Open Longevity is a good organization to contact. There's others we rely for politics, but I think the most important thing is to not do nothing. Don't just sit back and wait for somebody else to solve this problem for you. There's got to be something you help, if you care, don't do nothing. Don't be passive, because we're not on track to solve this. So every person who's being passive is, I don't know, I mean, yeah, they're...
It's a hard field to work in, but it's also the most interesting one. Mark is right. You will find any position there. You will create any position there. There's a task for everyone. It's just very, very interesting. God, we're trying to stay alive. I think, what could be more interesting than that?
Yes, indeed. And you heard them. You are needed. You as an individual, your efforts are needed for this field so that we can hopefully all live long and prosper.
This is like
the closing thing.
This is the vitalism.
Yeah. And do more. Ask yourself what's holding you back from doing more.
Yes, indeed. So thank you very much for joining us today. It was a pleasure speaking with both of you.
All right. Thanks.
Same.